Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ovo podcast. And in today's episode, I'm going to talk about schizophrenia. Let's start. So, the term schizophrenia is likely familiar to many of you. It's a popular theme in movies, books, and other creative works, largely because schizophrenia, despite the passage of time, remains strange, misunderstood, and even unknown to many. And this creates an aura of mystery, mysticism, fear, and above all, unpredictability around the symptoms commonly associated with schizophrenia, fueling its frequent portrayal in horror, thriller, and true crime genres. But is there really something to fear? Well, a defining symptom of schizophrenia, regardless of its specific subtype, is a loss of connection with reality, either partial or total. And this kind of disconnect is hard for us to imagine. While we can conceive of losing contact with the ground or a close person, we always recognize the reality around us and we can situate ourselves within it. Well, estimating the prevalence of schizophrenia is challenging due to varying diagnostic criteria that have evolved over time. Still, a global average suggests that around 0.7% of the population may experience symptoms of schizophrenia at some point in their lives. Well, this isn't an enormous number, but it's also not a rare disease, as symptoms of psychosis, whether mild or severe, are observed regularly in psychiatric units. Well, schizophrenia itself is essentially a cluster of symptoms that vary in intensity, and depending on the specific mix, a particular subtype of schizophrenia is diagnosed. Well, the term most commonly appearing in popular culture is paranoid schizophrenia, but it's only one type. Other forms include disorganized, undifferentiated, catatonic, and residual schizophrenia. Historically, there's also the concept of symptomless schizophrenia. Although it is not a diagnostic entity, this term originated in the Soviet Union, where the characteristic symptom was essentially disagreement with the ruling political discourse. So in other words, anyone opposing the government could be diagnosed with symptomless schizophrenia and placed in a hospital. In modern times, schizophrenia usually requires hospitalization, especially in the early stages of treatment when symptoms are most intense. But as treatment progresses, patients can transition to day rehabilitation units or live at home, making regular visits to check in. Well, regarding schizophrenia symptoms, the most characteristic ones are delusions and hallucinations. Well, delusions are, broadly speaking, incorrect beliefs. It's a type of disordered thinking content. So in paranoid schizophrenia, there are often illogical or sometimes even bizarre. An example might be a patient's belief that their thoughts aren't really their own, but are being transmitted by external sources. Alternatively, they might believe that their thoughts are somehow broadcast to others. In paranoid schizophrenia, patients are often highly suspicious and may believe, for instance, that a TV host is speaking directly to them, or that a poster is sending a hidden message meant just for them. But delusions can also take a form of body-related beliefs, such as a patient insisting that their hand feels abnormally heavy, or that an area of skin has changed its texture, with no medical basis for these claims. Well, even when confronted with reality, delusions do not lose their power. So, for example, if a doctor tells a patient that it's impossible for others to hear their thoughts, the patient might interpret the doctor as part of a conspiracy to steal their thoughts. Thus, early treatment for schizophrenia is challenging, as patients often have difficulty trusting healthcare staff and feel often misunderstood and isolated in their illness. In addition to delusions, hallucinations are common in schizophrenia. These are sensory experiences like auditory or visual hallucinations. These are visual and auditory hallucinations that only the patient experiences, so no one else can see it or no one else can hear it. And often these are voices heard solely by the patient, although some may also report seeing people or objects that aren't there, or in rare cases, smelling scents no one else perceives. A common experience in schizophrenia involves voices commenting on the patient's actions, while the patient may have difficulty distinguishing from real sounds in the environment. And this mix of real and hallucinatory inputs can lead to behaviors like talking to themselves as if on the phone, even when no one else is there, which may seem strange to an outside observer. So hallucinations can be particularly exhausting, as patients experience them like wearing headphones they can't remove, which switch on without warning. So for instance, a voice might yell suddenly or say something deeply unsettling, leading to reflexive reactions like turning around or shouting back at someone who isn't really there. Well, aside from delusions and hallucinations, schizophrenia is often accompanied by emotional disturbances, and these can include anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. So for example, things that used to bring joy may no longer be enjoyable. There may also be a blunted affect where the patient's reactions are minimal, whether to good or to bad news. And this doesn't necessarily mean they feel nothing. It just means the response is muted. So emotional responses can also be inappropriate, like a patient laughing upon hearing about a loved one's death. And many people with schizophrenia withdraw from the outside world, creating a sort of alternate inner reality. And this isolation is why schizophrenia usually requires at least initial hospitalization, because patients may become so absorbed in their alternate world that they can neglect basic needs like eating, hygiene, work, bills, and they can be spending entire days focused on finding proof of mind theft by external forces, for instance. And extreme cases, based on delusions of surveillance or eavesdropping, patients may, for example, try to tear cables out of walls, believing they're channels for transmitting information about them. While not always the case, schizophrenia can lead to self-harm. And patients with persecutory delusions might believe they've been implanted with a tracking device and attempt to cut it out. And I remember a patient who reported that she received satellite signals through her nerves, causing a tingling sensation under her skin. And while it may sound absurd to us, the sensation was entirely real to her, just as we feel heat or touch. Well, patients who maintain at least partial reality contact, or those who have been in treatment for some time, often ask if the doctor believes them. Well, surprisingly, the answer to this question is crucial, and it's essential for the patient to know that their symptoms aren't dismissed. The doctor affirms the experience as real while explaining it is a part of the illness, and treatment then aims to discern what experiences are real versus those created by the illness. And there's often a question of whether a person with psychotic symptoms, particularly schizophrenia, poses a danger to others. Well, occasionally reports emerge that a patient previously treated for schizophrenia committing a violent act. Well, it's true that a patient with intense delusions or hallucinations may pose a risk. I recall one case where a patient believed that part of society was made up of human-like entities trying to harm him. And he once saw a man glance at his watch, lifting his wrist, which triggered the patient to attack the man, fearing for his safety. Although this example was harmless, it still demonstrated outward aggression, but patients can sometimes be aggressive. But equally, a neighbor without a diagnosis could be dangerous. So research doesn't support a blanket label of dangerous for patients with schizophrenia. Well, in terms of treatment and prognosis, up until the mid-20th century, treatments were more likely torture, with patients often restrained in straitjackets or subjected to electroshock therapy. And as these methods yielded few results, patients were often left in hospitals indefinitely. Well, today, there are more humane therapeutic options, along with antipsychotic medications to alleviate symptoms. And the patients also benefit from individual and family therapy to support reintegration into everyday life as much as possible, of course. Well, in terms of prognosis, prognosis varies. Some patients don't return to the hospital after an initial episode, while others may experience recurrent episodes, though they become better at recognizing early symptoms and seeking help. And symptoms may completely disappear in some cases, while others continue experiencing them. However, therapy and medication help in distinguishing between real and illness-induced experiences, leading to a better quality of life. So, in summary, schizophrenia usually is a lifelong diagnosis, and once diagnosed with schizophrenia, people usually stay in this state for at least a few years. But still, there are patients who we can call them highly functional patients because they work, they have family life, and so on. So some patients react better to treatment. Some patients, approximately 10% of patients, do not react to treatment. Well, it depends on the type of schizophrenia. But in general, we have effective therapy, and the sooner the better. So if you see that your loved ones or your friends experience difficulties and you observe symptoms that you find disturbing, so don't hesitate, because the sooner they get help, the better they feel. Well, thank you for today's episode, and until next time, bye bye.